What's up and welcome to a brand new episode of NeoVintage News. Now for you guys who haven't seen this show before, basically I go over the biggest stories from last week in gaming, give you guys my quick thoughts, give you guys a little bit of a rundown of what I've been playing, and some game recommendations on the latter half of the show, and then we make good time on that. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the last episodes I've been doing. I've been kind of fleshing it out a little bit more, putting a little bit more in there so it can be a more suitable replacement for the podcast. And also I wanted to give you guys a heads up that by the time this comes up, there's a good chance that Players Unified, the podcast, episode 1, will be up by that point. I'll link that down below if you have any interest in podcasts about uplifting black creators and stuff like that. And a couple stories that we're going to cover in the NeoVintage News shows will be also covered on the podcast in more depth. So let's just start here. We could start out with Fallout and my friend Pedro getting a show. So a TV adaptation of the Fallout series is on the way and it's coming to Amazon. The news was announced with a brief teaser trailer that doesn't reveal any specifics about the show, but it's been confirmed that Amazon has acquired the rights to a Fallout TV show, and that some of the key talent behind Westworld will be working on that show. Also, the hit game My Friend Pedro is also getting adapted to a TV show. It's going to be written by David Kolstad, the writer and creator of the John Wick movies. So these are really exciting things. Now, for anybody who has watched our content before, you guys know I'm not the biggest enthusiast when it comes to adapting games or anime into live action properties. I feel like games a lot of times speak fine for themselves. I don't feel like they need to be adapted in any ways. But in terms of, the wide way they can turn out from the Uncharted movie to something a little bit more faithful, this is a little bit more exciting. The fact that it's coming through Amazon makes me pretty excited. I've liked a lot of the Amazon original shows like The Boys and stuff like that. So they've shown themselves that they can do pretty good adaptations. So I have faith in that regard. And if you've played My Friend Pedro, you know that kind of kinetic action. Having the guy who did John Wick makes all the sense in the world. That's a match made in heaven, pretty much. So right now, I am cautiously optimistic. I'll probably check it out when it comes out, but I'm keeping my eye on it. Fallout is going to be especially interesting to me because that world is really fascinating. But at the same time, a lot of the Fallout experience is kind of that, long-term exploration, the looting, the finding different gears, all that metagame stuff that is not going to be present in the show. So I don't know exactly how they're going to adapt it other than, taking that aesthetic, taking that world and maybe injecting an original story into it. I don't know, but I'm excited to see what they do. So I guess we can move on to the next story now, and this is all about the 2K21 next-gen pricing. Now, there's an interesting story for one reason. I'll get into that after. So NBA 2K21 will have a recommended price of $69.99 when it launches on PS5 and Xbox Series X this year. That's $10 more than the PS4 and Xbox One version, which has a recommended price of $59.99. Now, this is very interesting because we've had that kind of $60 price point for a really long time, dating back, I believe, to the either early 2000s or the late 90s at this point. And it's always been kind of a conversation and contention point. It's like, are games too expensive or are they not expensive enough? Costs for video games have been skyrocketing in the past 10 years or so, where it's costing way more, it's requiring way more resources, way more time to make these big AAA experiences. So naturally, to some developers, they may feel like that $60 price point really doesn't cut it anymore, really doesn't, incentivize profit in the way that they would want. So they want to increase that price. But the point that kind of confuses me here is the fact that they're saying it's going to have the $70 for the next-gen versions. However, they've already made it clear, at least with Xbox Series X, and I think to a same extent the PS5, is the fact that these games are all backwards compatible. So why would you get the next gen version for $10 more when you could just get the previous gen version and run it on the next gen consoles? Now, I understand that there's probably going to be some technical differences, but it's going to be a weird sell to basically have two versions of a game available on one console. The last gen and the current gen versions both running just fine, unless they find a way to block that. But I'm really confused as to see how that ultimately looks once everything's said and done. Like, will people be willing to shell out the extra $10 for a similar experience for a game that is already readily available on the same console? I don't know. It remains to be seen. Sports games and the annualized sports games industry is not really my cup of tea. That's not something I buy. I've bought a couple of sports games in my life, but always at a severely discounted rate. It's always been, a year or two removed from the latest one, so they drop significantly in price. So that's when I kind of jump in, because I'm not really super into or interested in the most up-to-date roster. So I'm not really the person that this is targeted towards, but I'm curious to see how the average consumer adapts to this new pricing strategy. I am definitely sympathetic to both kind of fields of thought, where $60 for some of these more crazy experiences, like the fact that you could pay at launch $60 for a game like The Witcher or like Cyberpunk, for example, which are these incredibly deep games that you can spend dozens of hours getting lost in that world. I think that's in many ways worth more than $60. You can make that argument, but at the same time, I feel like we're already in a situation where people are paying $60 for launch games and are getting way less value than they ought to get out of that $60, and now we're gonna be in a point where people are paying even more. But again, this is what's important to note, is the fact that we pay $60 in America right here, but there's already places in the rest of the world, like Australia and stuff like that, where they're paying way more than $60. So this is kind of a uniquely American problem right now, where we've been at a fixed price point at $60 for quite a while, but other places in the world have been seeing inflation in some degree. So I'm not by any means an accountant for a game developer or anything like that, so I can't say whether this increase in profits is really that necessary, or they're just seeing an opportunity to make a little bit more money. I can't tell you that. I've seen some podcasts and stuff like that existed between Sean Layden and Reggie Fils-Aimé, who they were talking about like the increasing price point. So this is something that they've kind of had on their minds for quite a while, at least on the PlayStation side. And so I always expected this to happen. There was no way that, like, for 30, 40 years, the price point was going to remain exactly the same. And if you actually adjust for inflation, games are actually cheaper than they ever been before, especially once you go back to the Atari days. Then the game crash happens, and then the Nintendo and stuff like that. If you adjust for inflation, games and game consoles were way more expensive back then. And there was way more variation in terms of what games launched for in price. Things are pretty standardized right now. Budget titles get the 40, every once in a while you get a 30, and then AAA experiences get the full 60. So again, curious to see how it plays out. Ultimately, for some of the higher end experience, I'm gonna shell out what they want for it. But again, as I get older, as I have more disposable income, but also as I become more of a discerning consumer, I tend to withhold, see reviews, see what people think. Is it a property I'm that interested in before I even buy something at launch anyways? And I feel like if they increase the price point, that just makes me even more reserved about shelling out that full, $78 at that point, to make sure that is a really good title. Like, for example, I buy Call of Duties almost every fall for the campaign only. If they increase the price of every annualized Call of Duty to $70 and I only pay, it was already a hard sell at $60. Why I was buying it at launch, because I do not play the multiplayer suite. If they go up to 70, that, for example, would be something to break me buying it at launch, period. But again, some people have that money. They're willing to shell out the money for, whatever experience they want. So there's always going to be a consumer, and ultimately the value of something lies on how much somebody's willing to pay for it. So I guess we can move on to the next story, and this is all about Crysis Remastered and the issues that it's facing. So Crytek has been planning to reveal a remastered version of the original Crysis, but a video showing the game leaked a little bit early on YouTube, and fans reacted really poorly. It was not running too well, and now the game is being delayed. They released a statement online that reads, "Your passion for the Crysis franchise deserves an undeniably high-quality game, and we are committed to delivering all that. To ensure that we meet that commitment, we need to delay the launch date, all platforms, and trailer premiere by a few weeks." Some background is that Crysis is an awesome shooter that released back in 2007. It had 2 sequels at that point, and this remaster is pretty much coming to all platforms. And so that's really, really interesting. It's important that they get this right, and the reason for that is Crysis, beyond being a pretty fun game that people like, is that it's known for being very hardware pushing and generation defining in terms of like the visual fidelity. And so if they drop a game that falls anything short from that and doesn't push the envelope like the previous entries, then they're kind of in many ways spitting on the legacy of what those games kind of established previous to that. I am by no means a Crysis superfan, but I do definitely know what it means for the game industry, and I think it's important that they meet those expectations. And I like the fact that they're being really receptive to their fans and hearing that, because they very much could have doubled down and be like, we're proud of what we're doing, maybe fix it in a patch, put it out anyways, and then do what it do, and then maybe some people are going to be burned along the way. And for the fact that they're like, okay, we hear you, it's not where you guys want it to be, let's hold back, let's regroup, let's put a little bit more time to polish into that. I'm not too mad at that. And again, I'm not the person that gets super enraged at any sort of delays. I feel like if it ultimately results in a more polished product, I ain't mad at it. So I guess we can move on to the next one, and this is a pretty big story that I think a lot of people should be paying attention to, and it's all about EVO 2020 and its cancellation. So EVO Online has been canceled. So for you guys who don't know EVO, it's basically a giant event dedicated to the fighting game community. Obviously, with COVID going on right now, it was going fully online. Refunds will be issued to all players who purchase a band. But the cancellation is due to EVO CEO Joey Quellar, I believe his name is, being placed on administrative leave following several accusations of sexual misconduct. Numerous publishers pulled out of EVO following these allegations, including Bandai Namco. They did Tekken 7, NetherRealm with Mortal Kombat 11, and Capcom with Street Fighter 5. Now, we've seen many events get canceled in the past few months, obviously due to the pandemic. This is the first one that is due to something else that's going on in the game industry, which is a massive Me Too-like movement going on through the game industry, holding a lot of people accountable. Now, I'm not going to get super deep into that because in many ways I don't feel like that's my place to talk about necessarily. I'm an outsider from the game industry. I'm a dude. I don't deal with a lot of the sexual harassment issues that unfortunately are queer and female individuals that deal with in the game industry. So I'm not gonna go into that too deep, but I think it's generally a great thing that we're holding people in the game industry accountable for their actions, and that's definitely trickling into, on a bigger level, holding these executives accountable. We've seen this in the movie industry, and you're gonna see that trickle into many other industries. I'm sure music's coming up, and it's going through games right now. So I think that's generally a good thing that they're holding things and accountable, being receptive, and obviously with these big people and publishers pulling out, there goes a lot of the money. So kind of cancellation was going to happen no matter what. I think this is something we should pay attention to, because an event this large being, kind of thrown awry by these allegations and stuff like that is something worth paying attention to, because that means some real significant change is on the way for this industry, and definitely for the better. I feel like there was an incredibly toxic culture going on in the workplace in terms of influencers, in terms of networking and all that stuff. A lot of things need to change. A lot of people were unfortunately victimized in that process for other people to get ahead, for other people to get what they wanted out of the industry at the behest of others. And I'm glad that that's all fallen apart in a many good ways, so that we can be in a situation where everybody's kind of on a more even playing field and nobody has to worry about their safety, or do they need to compromise certain things to get higher up. We need to dead all that culture, and I'm glad that the game industry is definitely in a transformative state, and that voices that were formerly being ignored are definitely being heard right now. And I hope that every victim can come forward, tell their story, and have people held accountable for that. So I guess we can move on to the next story, and this is about Resident Evil Village and the fact that this is definitively not Resident Evil 8. So in a recent interview, developer from Capcom said it omitted the number entirely from the title to focus on the game's setting. You can call the actual village another character in the game. So that shows kind of how they're looking at it. And we did that because we wanted players to understand that. The players, Tsuyoshi Kanata and Peter Fabiano, answered before expressing their hope for players to abbreviate the game with Village and not RE8. So that you can interpret this story multiple ways. So in some ways you could be like, okay, so Resident Evil 8 is still oncoming. Or you could look at that as they're kind of doing away with the number conventions, and they're going to be like Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil something else. And there's always going to be kind of a subtitle there, doing away with the number system completely. I'm kind of skewing more on that edge. I think they're probably going to do away with the number conventions completely. For some franchises, I think it works, like Final Fantasies. They're just 16, 17, 18. They're going to keep going higher and higher, and I think there's definitely kind of a novelty to that kind of strategy. But for many places, or in many franchises, when you hit a certain number, it gets a little silly, where it's like when you are going to go play like a Resident Evil 8, to people who are unfamiliar with the franchise, that kind of holds the baggage of 7 previous entries, and that's a lot to go back and replay. So with just the village setting there, it kind of communicates like this could be its own thing, its own setting, its own experience, and you don't necessarily inherit all the baggage of the previous one, even though it does have a narrative that's going to cross into this one, I'm sure. So I'm pretty excited about this game. The trailer that they showed off looks pretty awesome. I'm really excited to it, and the most exciting thing, obvious, that it's going to run with the new engine that they have. It's going to inherit a lot of the gameplay elements of RE7, but at the same time it's harkening back to imagery that's evocative of RE4. So it's kind of like in many ways, this has the opportunity to be the best of both worlds, of like the story of 4 with the gameplay of 7. And not everybody loved the gameplay of 7, but looking at the sales, looking at the critical reception, that was obviously something that resonated with a lot of people. So I think this is a really smart direction for Capcom to go in, and generally a positive direction to go in to reinvigorate the franchise. They're kind of on a high right now. RE2 remake was well received. RE3 remake was in many ways kind of rushed. Judging by the timetable that the Village game is on, it looks like they're going to take way more time with this one, so it's not going to be as kind of like spat out as RE3 was. And in many ways they can't do that because, again, RE3 reuses a lot of the assets of RE2. This one, they're kind of making from scratch. You can't import any old models from previous games. Again, this is in a whole new engine. The fidelity is going to be higher. Chances are it's going to be a next-gen game. So they need to take their time with this one. They need to get it right. And I have a lot of faith in this game because I think Capcom sees what their fans like, what they were receptive of, and see that they're in a positive place in the industry right now, and that they need to maintain that kind of momentum that they're having from the RE2 remake. So this is the last main story that we're going to go on to, and this is actually one of the stories that I'm going to be covering on the Players Unified podcast, and I'm going to be going more into depth on the story over there. So if you want like a detailed breakdown, especially of like the racial dynamic of the story, go check out that podcast. But for here, I'm going to kind of gloss over the top level things because I think this is important to the game industry to pay attention to. So in support of the hashtag Stop Hate for Profit movement, Sony has decided to suspend advertising for July for Facebook. Following numerous other companies, including Starbucks, Ford, and Coca-Cola, Sony is pulling all PlayStation advertisement from Facebook and Instagram until at least the end of July. This move will see the removal of all advertising and on the social media platforms, both paid and unpaid. Facebook has come under fire recently for continually allowing hateful content and misinformation to exist on its platform unchallenged, while other platforms have acted against such content. So let me explain to you guys what's going on here. So Facebook has gotten a lot of scrutiny lately because there's a lot of quote-unquote fake news and hateful rhetoric and stuff like that going on online. And Facebook has a different content policing policy than specifically at least like Twitter, for example, who have been a little bit more forward on removing that content. And so some companies are basically holding Facebook accountable and be like, you're not going to get our advertising and that ability to get that money until you guys address these concerns. My confusion is that that kind of like July deadline, I think they should withhold advertising until the change they see in Facebook is actualized. You take out July, sure, that hurts their pocket, and sure, that can be enough to really sway them to make the changes you want them to make. However, if it's ultimately about realizing change and you're not just falling on a bandwagon, then I think take away the deadline and be like, you're not getting a PlayStation ad or an Xbox ad or whatever part of the game industry or any company, you're not getting any of our ads until you guys, start policing the content in the way we are. And I won't necessarily speak on to the merit of this because I haven't dived deep into Facebook's removal policy. I know that they have a more lax approach to it. Specifically, Zuckerberg has a different view on it, and he has a lot of concerns about specifically quelling more conservative voices. So I know there's a bit of a discussion to be had there, but it is no, secret in the industry, the fact that fake news propagates like hell on Facebook, and that could be really harmful to people of color who in many ways are specifically targeted by these type of malicious attacks on social media. And Facebook has had a different approach of attacking that kind of stuff. So I think this is a really important story to pay attention to. Right now it's just PlayStation pulling ads, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see maybe Nintendo and Xbox follow suit, maybe Sega, who knows. So I think it's something to keep an eye on. Despite what you think about maybe the hashtag Stop Hate for Profit movement, this is something where the game industry is reacting in a very tangible way to the kind of social movements that are going on in specifically America right now. And so it's something to keep an eye on for. So I guess we can move on to the latter half of the show right now, which is games I've been playing. So I just finished Last of Us 2 recently, and I would like to do a more dedicated podcast to that. I'm still kind of going back and forth about how I'm going to approach that. I was thinking originally, I'll do kind of like a spoiler cast, the same thing I did with Final Fantasy VII. But the issue with is like the discourse around Last of Us 2 is so volatile right now that I don't know if I'm necessarily trying to jump into and just bring about that unnecessary amount of hate, because again, people are not seemingly receptive to kind of objective opinion and just playing around with some of the themes and the ideas explored in this game. People don't seem particularly receptive about that. They want to see either dunking on it or endless praise. They don't want to see kind of maybe something more in the middle of like, I like this about the game, I didn't like this about the game. I don't think it's completely meritless, but I think it's definitely worthy of critique in certain areas. But yeah, especially with all the stuff with like Laura Bailey, the voice actress, who's been getting like death threats and stuff like that, like there's something significantly wrong with a lot of specific, I could say the game industry, but a lot of people who play games and consume things on a more hardcore manner, and their kind of detachment from reality. There's some significant issues there that I feel like need to be addressed, and I don't know if me throwing myself into discourse is going to be beneficial for this channel at least, or even my interest in learning how to critique games more objectively and more effectively. So I'm still thinking about that. Maybe you'll see a spoiler cast dedicated to Last of Us 2. Maybe not. I don't know. But specifically, I've been playing Far Cry 4. Now, this is a game that I've been meaning to go to for quite a while. I was a big fan of Far Cry 3. I jumped into Far Cry 5 when that came out. Far Cry 4 is just something I kind of missed. I don't know how. It's like 4 and Primal were just something that I just kind of lapsed, and I was playing other stuff at the time. Got really into JRPGs at that time. And so, finally, went on sale. I picked it up maybe 2 or 3 months ago, actually. Dabbled in it for 20 minutes or so, but then I kind of got distracted, started playing the Final Fantasy games, eventually moved on to like Final Fantasy VII Remake. I moved on to Last of Us 2. And so once I finished Last of Us 2, I'm like, this is the time to play Far Cry 4, because I'm done with Final Fantasy X, and I haven't moved on to Ghost of Tsushima yet because it's not out yet. So let me play it right now, and I've been diving into that. I'm maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 hours. I haven't looked at the game clock, actually, and I'm really, really enjoying the world. It really took a little bit longer to get its stride than the previous entries. At first, I was kind of like, oh, okay, the setting's interesting. I like the mountains, stuff like that. But once I got deeper into there, I learned more about the world. I learned more about the characters. I learned more about like Pagan Min, the main antagonist of the story. I found something actually really, really intriguing, really, really unique what they're going about there. Some of the way that they work in kind of their religions and stuff like that. That obviously has some kind of Buddhist and a little bit of Hindu influence there. Obviously that world is giving me very like Tibet vibes. Nepal, stuff like that. So I'm really, really enjoying it so far, and it's kind of just fun to be able to explore an open world, kind of click off that checklist as Ubisoft and Far Cry games do so well, and just have something kind of light to play. It's not too oppressive, not too demanding, especially after Last of Us 2 that was so mentally draining and demanding. Going to Far Cry 4 is a nice palate cleanser, especially once I transition to Ghost of Tsushima, which I don't really know what to expect there narratively. This is a perfect game to play in the meantime. So it's pretty cheap right now. I think you can get it for like $10 online. So if you're looking for something fun to play, if you've liked the other Far Cry games and you haven't played 4, I highly recommend jumping into it. I think you can get, 20 hours out of it, 15-20 hours, maybe even more if you really enjoy those type of games. It's just kind of mess around in the world, see what you could do, blow things up, kill people. You know how Far Cry games go. Nothing too deep, nothing too innovative necessarily, but lots of fun to be had there. And then I guess we can end off the game with a game recommendation. And this week we're going to choose Swim Sanity. Now, you guys know I try to err on smaller indie titles, games that I think that are either doing something really interesting or that is developed by like a personal color that I think we should support, that are making really awesome moves in the game industry. And that definitely falls this week. Swim Sanity is a multiplayer underwater shooter with action-packed co-op and versus game modes, all supported by online and local play. You could play as the hero Muba, who uses a variety of unique powers power-ups and weapons to survive in this aquatic world. This was released back in 2019, is developed by Decoy Games. I'm going to link everything down below. I picked it up on Switch, and so far I'm really enjoying it. It's a fun multiplayer type game that I highly recommend you go check out if you're looking, especially if you're looking for multiplayer games. Those are becoming more and more sparse throughout the industry right now, where you'll have like, online multiplayer, but not so much co-op anymore. So this is an awesome kind of thing to see in the game industry. And Decoy Games, I'll get deeper into them on the Players Unified podcast, where I'll basically talk about various people in the industry that I think are making cool moves. And then obviously there's a video component of Players Unified, where I actually reach out to those individuals, get their express consent, and feature them more visually. This is going to be kind of like a quicker way to do that on the podcast. So if you want more information on Swim Sanity, if you want more information on some of the stories that I covered in this show, go check out that podcast. That will be the main podcast that I'm focusing on going forward. And at some point there very much might be a dedicated YouTube to that content. If you're not super into that kind of content, it will have its own place eventually. But for now, I'm gonna host Players Unified on NeoVintage Games to kind of have everybody in the same place, and then if it needs to split off, it needs to split off. So that was NeoVintage news for you guys. I told you guys it was going to be anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes depending on the stories and how much I have to say about that, also depending on how much I've been playing and what I have to say about the game recommendation. So there's a lot of kind of like flexibility in the show, and I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I enjoy making this show. Again, this is going to be a weekly show. Expect this every Sunday, and also I would like a Players Unified podcast to kind of swap in between maybe every other week and stuff like that. So lots of content coming for you guys. I also have a video of analyzing Midnight Club on the way, and then I have a Players Unified episode 2 video component coming on that channel as well. So keep an eye out for that during this next upcoming week. Until next time, this is Jabril from NeoVintage Games. Love you guys. Bye.